Welcome to Lesson 6C, Normal Shock Examples. We've been talking about normal shocks, so in this lesson we'll show several qualitative examples of normal shocks. I'll discuss shocks in shock tubes and blast waves from explosions, and we'll do a dimensional analysis for a blast wave. Consider our standard CD nozzle, where we have subsonic flow, sonic flow, and supersonic flow, with back pressure such that we get a shock in the diverging portion of the nozzle. Here's what that shock would look like in a supersonic wind tunnel. Note that in real life it's not perfectly straight like we always draw, and there are boundary layer effects here, which have been studied in detail by my colleague Professor Cimbala. And many of these pictures are from the Penn State University Gas Dynamics Lab. This is a color Schlieren image, by the way. In my undergraduate fluids lab here at Penn State, we have a small supersonic wind tunnel where we can vary the back pressure. Here it's just low enough to get a shock just beyond the throat. And when the back pressure is lowered, the shock moves downstream. This dimension is only about an inch or so, so there's lots of boundary layer effects, and the shock is not very clean. If you look closely, you can see mock lines here. Another example is a shock tube. Consider a long tube, typically round, but it could be rectangular. And at t equals 0, we have a membrane that splits the flow into two parts. The stagnation pressure P0 is high on the left and P0 low on the right. Oftentimes this is open to the atmosphere, so P0 would be P atmosphere. At t equals 0, the speed is 0 everywhere, and the gas in here can be air or any other gas, and it could be different in the left and the right. We'll talk in much more detail about shock tubes later, but now just qualitatively. At t equals 0 plus, which is just a little bit of time after 0, we suddenly break the membrane. I recall at Caltech when I was a grad student, we had a membrane like this, that looking downstream, it was a circle that was scored. In other words, there were cuts in it, but not all the way through, and there was some kind of a hammer device that was spring-loaded, and at t equals 0, it was released and smacked right into this central part of the membrane. Remember that the pressure here is very high and the pressure here is low. This membrane is about to break, and as soon as it's hit with this hammer, it breaks at these scores. So the membrane breaks like that, leaving a gap where the high pressure air suddenly starts streaming through here. There's all kind of turbulence, and it's not very smooth at the beginning, but it eventually merges into a real nice shock. At some later time, T1, you have a shock moving down the tube. Since this is a moving shock, we call 1 the region before the shock, and 2 the region after the shock to be consistent with our notation. But since the shock is moving from left to right, 1 is to the right and 2 is to the left. In a stationary reference frame, the shock moves supersonically down the tube. Later in the course, we will analyze what happens, for example, when the shock hits a solid end and then gets reflected back into the tube and starts moving this way. So we'll analyze reflecting shocks. If you have an initially very high pressure, the Mach number and therefore the speed of this supersonic shock will be huge, which is why these shock tubes are typically very long, so you can do some cool measurements. Here's some examples of actual shock tubes. This one's from NIST, and this is the one I worked on at Caltech back in the 1980s. By the way, the tubes are usually very thick to withstand the high pressures in the shock tube. A third example of normal shocks is in front of a blunt object moving supersonically. For example, a bullet. If the bullet is shot and moving at supersonic speed, what happens is you get a bow shock in front of this bullet. And I should draw the bullet a little better, showing it to be blunt at the front. Right along the axis here, there is a normal shock, but then it bends back as drawn and becomes an oblique shock out here. If we zoom in this portion, we would again label this region 1 and this region 2, where the pressure is low to the left, and across the shock, the pressure is high. This is another example of a moving shock, since the shock itself moves with the bullet. here from right to left. But we can transform to a stationary reference frame, for example in a wind tunnel, or imagine moving with the shock. Here's a sphere at Mach number 3.0 upstream of the sphere, and this image is generated in a converging-diverging wind tunnel where we put the sphere in the test section with what we call a sting mount, which means that it is attached in the back. Since the flow is supersonic, the flow has no idea that that sting is there when it hits the object. Well, a bow shock forms just like with the bullet, and again we visualize it with a color Schlieren image. Of course, P0 had to be pretty high upstream in order to generate this supersonic flow. Here are some black and white Schlieren images from my old notes, which I can't even find the original sources. I just wanted to point out that if the nose is not blunt like the bullet or the sphere, you get oblique shocks. These are two-dimensional, and you get lots of interesting wake effects. I'm particularly fascinated by this picture, since we can see a kind of Kármán vortex street, and then a larger Kármán vortex street later on. The Kármán vortex street going from smaller vortices to larger vortices is what I studied in my PhD research, so this picture is very dear to my heart. Our fourth example will be explosions. Suppose you have a sudden explosion. It won't be perfectly symmetric at first, but after a while you'll get an expanding spherical shock that moves at supersonic speed away from the explosion. So at some time after t equals 0, let's erase these preliminary shocks, and you see this spherical shock, which is more commonly called a blast wave. In this case, the high pressure is behind the shock, and the low pressure is in front of the shock, typically atmospheric pressure. So this would be 1 and this would be 2. We have essentially a normal shock, although it's not in a straight line like we're used to. But locally it behaves as a normal shock. Here's an example where a bullet is fired from a pistol, and you could see actually a couple spherical shocks developing. The bullet itself is emerging out of the spherical shock, since it's actually moving faster. Here's a similar picture with a bullet shot from a rifle. A nice spherical shock is seen here, and the bullet, along with its wake, is seen here, having already passed through the shock. Here's a close-up of what that would look like. Here's another example. Professor Settles did some work for the FAA, simulating an explosion on an aircraft under this person's seat. These are dummies, of course, but you can see that the blast wave moves out from the explosion, and you get this nice spherical shock here. Again, this would be 1 and this would be 2, as the shock is moving outward. Some more examples: popping a balloon, a nice spherical shock, and a blast wave from an explosion. In this case, you can see it without any kind of instrumentation or equipment. This occurs when the atmospheric conditions are just right. Here's another spherical shock emerging from the open end of a shock tube. The shock had come down the tube, and they had a thin membrane that bursts, and then the shock itself develops into a spherical shock as it spreads out, when the very high pressure behind the shock hits this low pressure in the atmosphere. This is one of my favorite pictures. It's the USS Iowa firing its big guns, and the spherical shocks can be seen as ripples on the ocean's surface. These are, of course, expanding very rapidly. I also have some video clips of blast waves. In this one, they injected some smoke, and the blast wave hits, pushing the smoke to the left, but later on the smoke starts moving to the right. A similar thing happens in this short video clip, where these vehicles are actually knocked over by the blast wave, and then you can see the smoke reversing itself. Why is there this reversal of the flow? Well, let's analyze this qualitatively. If here's your explosion and the spherical shock forms, it travels at some speed vs, the shock speed. If some person or object is standing here, he will see the explosion but won't feel anything until the shock hits him. In front of the shock, we have low pressure and low temperature, but behind the shock, we have high pressure and high temperature. Depending on the strength of this blast, the pressure and temperature can jump significantly, and the shock wave would feel like being run over by a car. The person or the vehicles in the video clip are knocked over. The air is at 0 speed here, but there's a non-zero speed following the shock, so the air behind the shock moves to the left. Meanwhile, this blast produces a big mushroom cloud, where the speeds are doing something like that, drawing in air into the mushroom cloud. So at a later time, when the shock has moved farther downstream and is much weaker, the flow starts reversing, so the air starts coming back this way to feed the mushroom cloud. Now I want to do some simple dimensional analysis of a blast wave like this. Let's ignore any kind of ground effects. And here's our explosion from some kind of bomb. We'll let the total energy be E, which is the energy released by the explosion. And this is a constant. You release a certain amount of energy depending on the size and strength of the bomb. The spherical shock develops, and we'll let R be the radius of the moving shock. R is not a constant, but increases as T increases, since this blast wave is expanding out. Again, this is 1 in front of the shock and 2 behind the shock. So rho 1 is just the atmospheric density before the shock hits. Let Vs be the shock speed and Ms be the shock Mach number, defined as Vs over A1, where 1 is in front of the shock at atmospheric conditions. Let's do a simple dimensional analysis where the radius of the blast wave is a function of atmospheric pressure, the total energy of the blast, and time, since again R is expanding with time. I'll ask the students to take a few minutes to analyze this. Specifically, you should be able to get R is proportional to T to some exponent, so I want you to calculate this exponent using dimensional analysis.
I got 2/5.
That's correct, Harry. The solution is that R is proportional to T to the 2/5, or 0.4. I'll work through this problem. Again, R is a function of rho atmosphere, E, and time. The dimensions of these variables, for which I use squiggly brackets, are L, m over L cubed, energy is mL squared over T squared, and time is, of course, T. By the way, energy is force times length, so we have mL over T squared, force, times another L, which is how I got the dimensions for energy. From our undergraduate fluids class, n equal 4, which is the number of variables, including the dependent variable and the 3 independent variables. J equal 3 dimensions, since in this problem we have a mass, length, and time as the dimensions that are represented here, and thus K equal n minus j, or 4 minus 3, or 1, which you should recall means that we expect 1 capital pi, or dimensionless parameter. How do we find this dimensionless parameter? Well, again, this should all be review, but pi 1 is the dependent variable times the 3 repeating variables. Since j equal 3, we have 3 repeating variables, each raised to some unknown exponent. Now all we have to do is find these exponents, and we do that by forcing our pi to be dimensionless. So m to the 0, L to the 0, T to the 0. In other words, there's no dimensions. Plug in L for R, m over L cubed for atmospheric density raised to exponent A, the dimensions of energy raised to the B, and then time to the C. To force this to be 0 dimensions, we know that for mass, m to the 0 equal m to the A, m to the B from here and here, and we can add exponents when they're multiplied like this, so 0 equal A plus B. In other words, A equal negative B. We do a similar thing with L, and we get 0 equal 1 from here, minus 3A from here, plus 2B from here. And plugging in this result, we get 1 plus 3B plus 2B, and forcing that equals 0, which we can solve for B as negative 1/5. and thus A equal 1/5. Finally, for time, we get 0 equal negative 2b from here plus c from here. Plugging in this b, we get c equal minus 2/5. Thus, our pi 1, which is our only pi, is r rho atmosphere to the 1/5, e to the negative 1/5, and t to the negative 2/5. And the key here is that since there's only one pi, it must be a constant. Solving for r is the constant, or pi 1 if you prefer, times e to the 1/5, t to the 2/5 over rho atmosphere to the 1/5. And since both this and this are constants in this problem, we thus can conclude that r is a constant, a combination of these three constants, times t to the 2/5. This is the answer to our question, where the exponent is 2/5. So the radius of the blast wave is growing, but not linearly. The blast wave slows down as it keeps growing. Note that the shock speed, Vs, is simply dr dt, and plugging in our result for r, we have Vs equal 2/5 times this constant here, t to the negative 3/5. Again, we just combine these constants to conclude that Vs is a constant times t to the minus 3/5. And since this exponent is negative, the shock speed decreases with time for a blast wave. A direct result of this is that the Mach number of the moving shock also decreases with time. If we have our initial blast at t equals 0, the shock moves out very rapidly. At some later time, it moves more slowly, and as it keeps slowing down, the Mach number decreases until eventually, instead of Vs being greater than a, Vs becomes equal to the speed of sound, and Ms equal 1. Then for any t greater than t2, this shock weakens to just a sound wave, which you can imagine as the weakest possible shock. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos. 1, 2, 3. That's all there is to it.